OpenHydr supply groundbreaking marine turbines that generate renewable energy from tidal streams. After 11 years of pioneering tidal technology development, the company is now in the midst of a transition from startup mode to commercial production. Now, even when I say it myself, 11 years in startup mode, but that's the reality of it. Significant investment into this technology, which involves turbines dropping onto the ocean floor and collecting tidal energy and pushing it back to the grid through partners and customers of OpenHydr. So, Michael, if I can start, the first question I have for you is, you've progressed from R&D to commercialization during a period of dramatic change and market uncertainty. How has digital technology in your IT operations helped support the business strategy?
So we've a large demand for gathering and storing telemetry data coming from these turbines, be it measuring the tidal current and direction, rotational speed, wear and tear, temperatures, and this can quickly mount up into terabytes. And we have, while we initially in the R&D phase were storing that in-house on servers, the volume started just to get out of control, and the backing up and protecting of that. So we have moved that into the cloud, and through an Azure model, we have access to as much storage as we need and can ramp it up or down more or less on demand.
Yeah,
and it's taken hassle out of my job and my business community doing the analysis on that data. It's just there.
Yeah,
you know, what was a technical challenge is just there.
Yeah, it's a real example of having to have that kind of rapid ramp up and scale in your case. And I can imagine in the future going forward, like the generation of data is going to do nothing except amplify and exponentially grow, particularly as IoT becomes a component of the operational element of the business.
By being in the cloud, that data is accessible from wherever our turbines might be around the globe on our customers' sites.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Michael, you have a global footprint and you have international partners. Is technology important in sustaining those relationships?
It's vital. It's vital, Jimmy. We have a very broad network of people and organisations we have to collaborate with. It ranges from design teams that we engage to do very specialised design. One example is a pressure vessel which houses the turbine control system 30 metres down under the water. So we get specialists in to do that design work, but we have to share with them what's going inside that pressure vessel. And we want to share that. That's important and valuable information to us, and it needs to be protected, but it has to be made accessible.
Sure.
So we use our SharePoint platform for that, where we can create space within the SharePoint platform and grant access on a very controlled and individual basis, and withdraw it and determine the permissions that people need.
So when Steve and Jerry were speaking earlier on about rights management, I imagine that's a very big part of that particular need. Yeah.
Rights management is something I'm really interested in.
Yeah, excellent. So what have been the principal benefits of outsourcing your IT operations, and what's the driver behind that for the organisation?
Well, I've touched on one of the impediments there, the scalability of using cloud platforms. The mission I have for IT within our organisation is to keep IT's footprint in the company small, in terms of numbers of people and in terms of the capital investment required to deliver the services the teams need to do their work.
Yeah.
So the outsourcing model, be it infrastructure-wise, application-wise, software as a service. An example is we're shortly going paperless expense processing. We're a very mobile company.
Yeah.
And by pushing that into a cloud-based system, we remove a lot of administrative overhead, and for the end user, submitting their expenses daily, weekly, monthly, whatever, becomes a very straightforward affair.
Yeah.
Instead of a cumbersome paper-based.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think OpenHydr is a great example of a business that, you know, is having to be very agile, very dynamic, very quickly, and the cloud platforms are really helping you to drive that forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Michael. Mary, if you don't mind, I'll move on to yourself. As I said earlier on, Mary Fitzsimons is the Epilepsy Lighthouse Programme Director. Absolutely fantastic e-health initiative. Dermot mentioned it earlier on when he was speaking, and we're very proud to be associated with it. The programme is progressing precision, proactive and personalised, called 3P medicine, by using the National Epilepsy Electronic Patient Record to embed genomics, patient-reported outcomes and analytics into the clinical pathway. The programme is funded by the HSE in collaboration with the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, Beaumont Hospital and Epilepsy Ireland. Mary, if I can start, you've achieved true transformation in the treatment of epilepsy that has improved the quality of people's lives. What were the crucial stepping stones that made that possible?
Okay, so Jimmy, I think in order to give you the context
Sure.
of what the stepping stones are, if I could just kind of maybe give you 2 examples of transformation. So I suppose just to kind of put people in the picture, so in Ireland about 40,000 people have epilepsy. The good news about that though is about 2/3 of them have very well controlled epilepsy. So epilepsy is characterised by the occurrence of recurrent seizures. So there's about 1/3 of people who have difficult to control epilepsy, so maybe about 13,000 people. In that group, there's a small group of those people who would benefit from a device called a vagal nerve stimulator that has to be implanted. The only place in Ireland that gets done is in Beaumont Hospital. So just to put you in the picture, when we started the epilepsy EPR project, and even still today in 2017, a lot of healthcare is still very paper-based. So the authoritative record in a hospital, for example, is going to be your paper record, even though there might be electronic systems around the place. The problem about that is if you've got a paper-based record and you're trying to have shared care between a clinician based in West Cork and a clinician based in Beaumont Hospital in Dublin, it's just not possible with the paper record. So what the electronic paper record or patient record allowed us to do is, we'll say for that vagal nerve stimulator VNS device, people now who may start their epilepsy journey in Tory Island and come to Beaumont Hospital to have their VNS done, have their ongoing VNS care done locally. So the service is delivered to them in a more appropriate setting. That's truly transformational.
Sure.
It's really important for patient safety and quality. The second example I want to give you is something that we've been on this journey. I was just hearing about you, startup in over 11 years or whatever. We started this EPR journey back in 2003, 2004. And just kind of recently we're getting to a point around the analytics where, when people were talking earlier on about when the business gets it, people are really beginning to get it about what the data can do and turning the data into an asset in terms of how we improve the quality of patient care. And an example of that is 6 years ago the HSE established the clinical care programmes to try and make services more integrated across the country for a range of different conditions, but epilepsy was one of them. And my colleague Colin Doherty, who's a consultant neurologist, he was trying to set ambitions for the clinical care programme. One of his ambitions was, we're going to reduce the burden of seizures for people with epilepsy by 30%. So we all said, that's great. Okay, 30% from what? And he said, from where it is now. We said, well, what's the burden now? There was no way of measuring that. So we can measure all sorts of inputs to the health service, how many people wait on waiting lists, how many people turned up for surgery. But we're not very good at measuring the outputs. But what we're now beginning to be able to do with our EPR and with our engagement with Power BI and Microsoft through Ergo is to really look at our data and say, actually, how many of our patients are currently seizure-free? How many are having seizures weekly, monthly, yearly? Are we doing well, performing well as an organisation, and what can we do to improve? Anyway, to go back to your question, I'm sorry, but I had to put the context there.
That's fantastic.
To get to that, it was a journey of really understanding what was the problem we're trying to deal with. So there's no point in coming in with an IT solution and sort of saying, here's great electronic patient record, use that. You've really got to go and find out, what is the patient journey? What's happening for them? So we took a real anthropological approach, learned about the patient journey, learned about the healthcare providers across the country at primary care level, community care level, to really understand this journey so that we could design a solution. The other thing that we did was we had the software engineers become part of our clinical team, and they came to all of our weekly meetings. They got to know the language of clinical care. We got to know the language of software engineering. There was all sorts of abbreviations, and Brendan Dunleavy, who's the Java engineer in Ergo who works with us, he might speak in a different language, and we were saying, okay, spell that one out to us, Brendan. But the point is that over time we got to know each other's language and worked in a real collaborative way to deliver. So I'd say the collaboration, the iterative and agile approach. We decided we were going to build parts of our system and get them out there and get them used very quickly so that people could appreciate the benefit. Because early on, clinical people said, Mary, that's a great idea, the EPR is a great idea, but how are we going to use that and use the paper-based record and this record and that record? So even though they could kind of get the idea of the benefit, we wanted to make sure they felt it. And so we got things out in these agile kind of cycles sprints, and then built the system iteratively, released it, got more users in. So if you look at the trajectory of what we do, the system grew and grew and grew and continues to grow over time. So I think it's that agile kind of cycles, the engagement between the IT people and the business to understand each other. They're huge, and really understand the problem you're trying to fix.
Yeah. And I remember the first time I that came to my attention was walking past those software developers, and they're on the phone talking about genomics, and I was like, is this a new service in Azure? What is it? Yeah, it's an incredible story.
Well, and actually, when we got into the sort of genomics part of it, Brendan said, okay, maybe where can we do a course and sort of the ladybird version of genetics so that we get a handle on the language. But bizarrely, Brendan knows more about genomics now than I do.
It's a really strong story in collaboration. Thanks, Mary. Secondly, if I can ask you, how important was stakeholder buy-in from the HSE employees now, as well as management as well? So,
absolutely huge. I mean, as I said to you, again, at the very beginning of this project, it started its life out as an R&D project that was funded by the Health Research Board. And we were very fortunate to get that, because if we had tried to come along and say, okay, we want money from the HSE, for example, to do this, presenting that business case, people might have said, okay, it's a great idea, but we can't do it. Whereas having the R&D funding allowed us to kind of be innovative, and it allowed us the time to invest in getting that stakeholder buy-in. Because people immediately could get the idea, but they didn't have time. So in other words, you can knock on anybody's door and say, I have this great idea, I have this great device, and they'll say, sounds brilliant, okay, that's great, close the door, off doing the next thing. So there's a kind of an element of perseverance and courage and energy, and that takes time. So time was the huge thing. So yes, it was very important, and we did a lot of work around engaging with people who have epilepsy, their families, finding out directly from them what the journey was like for them. Where did information sharing and availability make that journey either good, bad, or indifferent? So that we could really bring that back to the clinical teams and to management and point out where there was difficulty. Again, for example, in a very paper-bound system, if you're somebody with a long-term condition like epilepsy, it could be diabetes, it could be asthma, it could be any long-term condition, and you go to specialist services, very quickly in a paper-based system, you can end up with a paper record that's about 3 telephone books take or something. So let's say you go to a clinician and he says to you, or she says to you, were you ever on this medication before? And you say, I can't remember. And they say, well, maybe let me have a look at your record. And they try to go through 3 telephone books to find that vital piece of information. Now, at the click of a button, like 3 keystrokes, we can find out, have you previously been on this medication? Did it work for you? Did you have any bad side effects with it? How did you benefit from it? And so these are real transformational things. But kind of getting stakeholder buy-in was, you have to kind of show these examples of where it really improves patient care and actually reduces, from a money point of view, reduces redundancy in the system, where, again, people have repeated investigations because access to the result of an investigation that somebody had in Galway maybe or something like that wasn't available. These are hugely transformational pieces.
Brilliant. And in terms of how we're preparing for the General Data Protection Regulation,
So again, from the very get-go with our project, even though the GDPR is coming, but we've all the way along kept data protection and privacy as a key important part of our project. So very, very early on, we engaged with the Data Protection Commissioner's office here in Ireland, and they came and met with us and gave us great advice. And actually we have one of the Assistant Data Protection Commissioners sits on our governance board, but just because he's there doesn't mean that we're perfect. So just practical things that we've done. With our end users of the system all the way along, we've done processes around asking them to identify privacy risks. You tell me a privacy risk, and then we do exercises in kind of assessing the nature of the risk, asking them to identify where are the controls in place for those risks. The idea being is we want to make the end user completely aware of the data privacy issues, and also raise their awareness about their responsibility and their accountability. So the GDPR kind of principles are around transparency, accountability, and data minimization. Yeah. So that exercise does that. Another thing that we're doing is in our portal work, we're starting to develop and implement this patient portal so that the patient now gets access to some of their records and gives us information directly from their real lives. And in that portal, they will have access to see who recently accessed their record, which clinicians. And if they see a name that they say, I don't know that clinician's name, why had they access to my record? So that's a transparency issue. Sure. So we're doing things like that.
Yeah. Excellent. I think everyone can agree that it's really shining light on the health service. Fantastic undertaking. Thanks very much, Mary. I have a question that popped up earlier on, just in general, that's very topical, obviously, for everyone in the room. So I'll put it out to the panel in general and whoever feels comfortable to answer it. But I suppose, given the events of last weekend, how are we seeing businesses react to that? In the context of the ransomware attack, I know in Ergo ourselves, we saw a significant rise in terms of people reaching out for guidance. Is there anybody seeing anything of that? John might want to even touch on that possibly, or Rebecca. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I can start. Well, our approach has been, really proactive outreach to our customers. We've released some security patches to unsupported products to ensure that our customers are protected. So, as I said earlier in my keynote, it's all about making sure that we're keeping up with these things and addressing, identifying and addressing the risk quickly to find a solution.
Yeah. Thank you.
So last weekend was a really interesting or really challenging weekend for our support team, and so we became aware of it shortly after midnight. We have a number of customers who we have managed security, managed patching, and the first thing was to ensure that that was all fine. And every couple of hours, Jimmy and I were getting updated to make sure that we were keeping everything going, and thankfully we did. So as we went into Saturday and we went into Sunday, we were starting to get called or emailed from customers who didn't have managed security and managed patching, and the reality is that in some organisations there were and are vulnerabilities, and they are now in a catch-up situation where they are trying to become secure. So I believe there'll be a massive amount of learnings out of what happened last weekend, and in the conversations that I've had with customers this week, in some ways this is a very significant distraction for the customers who hadn't got that as tight as it should have been. But for the customers who had managed security and managed patching and all that kind of stuff, for them it was business as usual. And I think that ties in very easily or very well to some of the conversations that we've been hearing today. That an organisation who might be underinvested, or who might be underinvested in IT, that is, or an organisation that is trying to spread itself too thin from a technology perspective is going to have challenges with that business as usual stuff, let alone the challenges of innovating to the Agile Edge. And I think that's whatever your role in the company is, or that's in this room. That's a message we should be bringing back to our businesses. That we've got to make sure we're secure. We have things locked down, not to the extent that we can't be innovative, but to allow us to be innovative.
Just wondering, what advice would you give us here at this event to go back to and approach our CEOs and CFOs to look for budget and all that kind of stuff to drive the whole digital transformation and drive the initiatives that come with it that you've just shown today?
So, Michael, you work in a law firm, a very successful law firm, and there is it's a very traditional way of delivering that service. Okay, so we're engaged with two different law firms in the city of Dublin. One who is actively trying to be a paperless business. Okay, because they want to take the cost out of delivering the service. And they understand for things like conveyancing or whatever, that the process needs to be greatly simplified. Another significant law firm in Dublin has engaged with a spin-out company that we have called Flowforma, which is looking at creating property leases and aircraft leases in an automated way. Because their customers saying, I want it faster, I'm not prepared to pay what I used to pay, and there's increased competition, and the competition is not just the guys in Dublin 2 and Dublin 4 anymore. It's in Singapore and Hong Kong and further afield where labour is at a different rate, and there was 2 years ago, as you know, we were involved in the transaction which you were advising us on a sale of another spin-off company, and you guys did a super job. But the people we were facing off to had a legal process whereby when we all put in 15 hours a day and we needed to go asleep, they sent the file to Asia and had drafting continuing from another branch of their business whilst we were sleeping, okay? Because they had the mobilization and the technology to do that. So, in my belief, if your business and your industry continue to do things in the traditional way, eventually somebody will disrupt you, and that's the message that should go back to your managing partner. I'm very happy to help you deliver that, by the way.
Yeah, Michael, yeah, I'll take it.
One thing that I would say for CIOs and IT people to engage with the business leadership is to listen to them. Is to it's an old it's this rule number one of sales is when they're talking, they're buying. So find ways to engage in the conversation about their ambition for the company, where it's going, wherever it's going. You're going to be able to take them there. So you need to start the conversation with them about where the business is going, and whether or not you have an answer then and there, or whether you bring that conversation back to haunt them again later. Use their words and their ambition and where they think the company is going. And by listening to them and by aligning with that, they will start to feel that you're on the same journey with them as well.
If I could just add, I find as an IT professional in my company, where I work on focusing on it, talking to the executives, is outcomes by introducing a new technology or something like that. If you focus on the technology, their eyes will glaze over because there's something we can say, wow, it looks great, fancy, nice new screens. If you focus on this will achieve a reduction in administrative labour, this will achieve a greater insight into where some money is going. It talks their lingo, but it talks about outcome, and the focus is a little bit off the tool because there's some bits of the tool you don't like. that becomes less of an issue.
Less of an issue, yeah.
You're looking at where is this bringing us? That's a good idea. Get on with it. There's a few bumps along the way to get there, but that's where you're headed.
Yeah.
That works.
Yeah, I think that business case piece, you know, and that buy into that business case piece, I think even in Mary's story, just around, you know, knowing the business problem and knowing in your case, patient problem, in your case, you know, how do I get this this product commercialized? But knowing those problems and then being able to collaboratively work with the business early and showing them those wins early, that buy-in. And once you get that buy-in, you're on that journey of you can only go in a better direction. So I think that's really the case, is that buy-in and business case. So are there any other questions coming from the floor for the panel or for the experts?
When they get to that certain curve where we're not the early adopters, but we're actually using the technology as tools to drive the business forward, how do I figure out whether this is the new big thing or whether this thing is going to drop once I start investing in it? Is there a way to figure that out?
And Damian, that's probably.
It's not unrelated to the last response here. It goes back to outcomes. When we talk about these things in innovation terms, we talk about the functionality. What are you trying to achieve with the tool? And tools get replaced. There's new tools coming all along. It's not the tools that drive disruption. Disruption is an evolutionary force. Nobody creates it. It happens at a particular point in time. The old generation starts to get fat and happy, gets lazy, and that creates an opening for the next generation to come along. Of all the tools and techniques, the real trick is to watch the business, watch where the customers are, watch where the organization is going, and then swap in and out the tools and techniques as they're required. And that's one of the big advantages of the cloud and of these virtual platforms. Is they will be changing. They will be reading what's happening. They'll be reading what's happening in other sectors. And just as you're ready to move on to the next challenge, somebody somewhere in the cloud universe will be creating the tools for that. So what your business is trying to do is really the driving force. That answers.
Yeah, I think I would definitely echo that piece about the platforms, because if you can build upon that, like Phil was referring to earlier on, in terms of, you know, if you're looking at something that's a product that is, you know, you're wondering, is this thing going to take off? Is it going to be something that if I invest in now will have longevity? You could have certainty in the platforms that you'll be able to move with the waves as they come. So it's definitely the key focus.
I think part of your presentation was talking about listening to the customer.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, and I think that's a really important point. And one of the things that I say a lot of things, but one of the things I say on a very regular basis, that we don't deliver technology, we deliver outcomes. Okay, and go back to the piece I said this morning. The CEO who's going to have the internet tomorrow night is not going to be concerned about whether his whatever is in the cloud. He's going to be, or she's going to be concerned about things like, at the moment, security. What's going to happen with GDPR? Is my operating margin improving? Can I collect my cash faster? Have I a better customer experience? And so I think going and having coffee with customers and listening to what their ambitions and their challenges are really important. And I think going back to Michael's point, I think as a CEO and other CEOs that I talked to, the biggest concern that I have is that we stay relevant. Because if we're not relevant, well then we're irrelevant, and that's not a good place to be if you're providing a service or a product. So staying relevant with the marketplace, and the marketplace is demanding in all of our products and services very different requirements than it did 2, 3, 5 years ago.
Is there an easy key way of making sure that we are staying relevant, or whether we're blissfully unaware that with a fat cat that's about to be replaced?
So I think to use that that Americanism, you can drink your own Kool-Aid and believe that you're brilliant, but I think you've got to take data points from all kinds of different places, from the industry, from competitors, from customers, And on a regular basis, you've got to really ask yourself, you know, are we doing all the right things to ensure that we will have a sustainable business in 2020? Because what I do know, particularly in the industry that we're in, that if we were doing what we were doing 3 years ago, we wouldn't be able to make payroll this month. You know, and any of you have ever been in our office, you go into the kitchen, and there's, when we were 20 years old, there's a mural on the wall that shows the continuous level of change. Somebody mentioned, maybe Phil mentioned it earlier, but the rate of that change is accelerating. The demands on all of us as businesses to provide enhanced services, different services, maybe at a more competitive price. That's changing at a ferocious rate, and I don't see any evidence that that's going to slow down.
I'd go just a little bit further than that and say this idea of stable states is no longer, that's the old paradigm. So the clue is in the name here today, the Agile Edge. What you're trying to do is be that agile, constantly evolving, constantly moving. You're starting to become, was it sharks that have to continue to swim or they die. The new paradigm is all about movement. Results in business, it's all about movement. It's about where you're going. The tools and techniques that you use will eventually become yesterday's typewriters. And getting to a position where you're constantly, if you're not constantly moving, constantly evolving, seeing the next thing, then you're not at the agile edge, and you're going to be left behind. You'll know it yourself. You'll know it.
Michael and Mary, a round of applause, please, for Mr. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. You guys can exit. So, just in terms of framing, just so, because we've been here now for quite some time this morning talking about various different aspects of the journey. The first thing we looked at this morning was the compelling reasons. I think we can all agree there are a number of different compelling reasons, and the GDPR is one example of a disruptor that provides a compelling reason to do something about digital. We've looked at, you know, framework and using tools and processes like Ergo have in terms of business alignment playbook to establish, I suppose, a clear way of establishing a move towards your new operating model to support digital. We've demonstrated through Steve and Jerry's demonstration typical examples of initiatives that we see when we run those workshops. And we've talked about the digital core and the imperativeness of that being at the core of your endeavours. And finally, what you do and what you can do, and I think what you can do even preparing for the unknown once you're there at the Agile Edge. So to finish up, I mean, success looks like you have IT at the core and not in the shadows, and business are aligned and coming into focus for IT. You're prepared for the unknown. You're digitally intelligent and responsive, and you've got a customer-centric organisation. And again, you've heard that customer word used so many times today, consumer, customer. That's what it's all about. Ultimately, we're all supporting better outcomes for end users and consumers.